Let's get going. So morning, welcome everyone. My name is Pat Harrison. I'm a solution architect here at Red Hat. I'm focused on the Ansible Automation platform. So I just work on Ansible pretty much across UK and Ireland, trying to help customers understand what the product does, how it works, and what it might integrate with. And in today's session, we're going to look at how we can integrate Ansible with ServiceNow. So we'll be looking at a few integrations, a few slides to get us going, because everyone loves slides, and then we'll spend most of the time looking at hands-on kind of examples of how this works and what we can do with it. So like I say, a few slides just to frame kind of what we've got here. And for those that are new to Ansible, just a quick slide on kind of what Ansible is and what it does. So Ansible's an automation and orchestration tool, which don't think of it as a Red Hat or RHEL specific automation tool. Ansible can literally automate across an entire data center. So as you can see from this slide here, we can cover a number of kind of key use cases around things like provisioning or configuration or application deployments. But we can do these, we can perform these use cases across a huge number of platforms. So you'll see at the bottom there, we can use Ansible obviously to automate against Linux. We can use it to automate against Windows, a number of cloud platforms, both on-prem and public. So VMware, AWS, Google, Azure, storage platforms like NetApp Pure Storage, our network infrastructure, whether that's Cisco kind of routing, switching, or Juniper, all the way through to firewalls like checkpoints and load balancers like F5s. So really, we can, like I say, we've got this huge breadth and depth here with Ansible, where we can automate across a data center with a very simple, human-readable automation language. And the reason we can automate across this kind of huge number of platforms is the community. There's a huge community around Ansible. It's one of the top 10 projects in GitHub in terms of contributors, and we've got this huge partner ecosystem, this huge open source community that are providing Ansible content for the platforms that they provide, so that as users of Ansible, I don't need to know how to code. I don't need to write my own, scripting language or anything like that. If I want to automate against NetApp are providing that automation capability for me. I can just take it, and this is what keeps Ansible simple. Ansible's a simple language because the heavy lifting is being done for us. Partners like NetApp, Google, F5 provide the automation capabilities for me, so that I can just consume it in a very, very simple way. And like you can see from here, we've got a pretty decent partner ecosystem. We'll take a look at some of these partners, and obviously we're focusing on ServiceNow today, so we'll be looking at that. But this is what powers Ansible, this community. And in terms of what Red Hat provide as part of the Ansible automation platform, really, there's three kind of layers to this. So I've already mentioned that the final point on there around certified content. So we've got all of this content out there, which we can use to automate across our data center and automate across all of these different platforms. We provide, like everything at Red Hat, we provide the enterprise wrapper around this open source software. So if you want to automate against your Cisco ACI environment or your VMware or your checkpoint firewalls, that's great. If you want an SLA around that and a support agreement and a vendor to kick when things go wrong, and knowing that you're going to get fixes and we're going to work on any enhancement you're looking for, that's what we're providing there around the certified content. We're also providing a platform for executing this automation. So Ansible is a very simple automation language, very easy to get up and running with. Enterprise environments aren't simple, they're complex. There's a number of controls and checks that are needed when we want to run things in an enterprise environment. So we provide a platform to allow you to execute this simple automation language within an enterprise environment with the relevant controls in place and making sure it can scale. And I'll come on to the platform in a moment, because that's going to be important for what we're doing today. And then the final layer we're adding is a number of cloud services. So all of that certified content that we've got from these partners lives in what we call the Automation Hub. That's a cloud service that you can go and consume if you're a Red Hat customer, and we'll take a look at that today. We also provide things like analytics. So if you want to understand how you're automating in your environment, which teams are automating heavily, what kind of jobs you're running a lot of, we can provide that data. And you can also then put figures into a kind of an investment calculator to see what kind of savings you're getting based on actual automation jobs that you're running in your environment and based on actual costs that you can associate to those automation jobs. So we're providing a full platform here of content, platform for execution, and additional cloud services to help you understand how you're automating. And what I really want to just drill down into a little bit more detail is the automation platform or the execution platform. So that's called Ansible Tower today. Ansible Tower is there to, like I say, provide that platform for execution and to solve a number of challenges that you may need to solve as you go from, if someone has picked up Ansible and they're starting to use it, to now wanting to use it in a production environment. So things like credential management. Ansible Tower provides a credential management capability. So when we think about all of the different platforms that we can automate against, the NetApps, the cloud platforms, our Windows and Linux estate, we need credentials to go and automate against those devices. Tower provides that credential management capability. We need central logging and auditing, so we know who's automating and what they're automating against, and we've got that audit trail. Tower provides that. It also provides role-based access controls, so that based on your persona, based on your job profile, based on what you do, when you authenticate to Ansible Tower, it will decide, or you can decide, if I'm a Windows engineer, when I log in, I should only see the Windows passwords, the Windows automation jobs, and the Windows servers that I can automate against. If I log in as a network engineer or administrator, I see a different view of the world. So we're able to put these roles around our automation to control who can automate, what they can automate against, and what jobs they can actually run. And then the final point here is, Ansible is natively a command line driven utility. Ansible Tower brings us from command line to user interface. So when we start to think now about push button automation, the ability to consume automation and consume services ultimately that the automation platform is providing, we can do that at the push of a button with Ansible Tower, and also via an API. So when we start thinking about integrating Ansible Tower with, as we're going to do today, ServiceNow, being able to consume this automation via an API is very powerful, because we've now got a standard way of consuming automation. Doesn't matter if I'm going directly into Ansible Tower to click a button. Doesn't matter if I'm consuming it via an ITSM like ServiceNow. It doesn't matter if I'm consuming it via a CI/CD pipeline. I've got a standard way of consuming this automation with all of the controls built into the platform, so that each team that wants to automate doesn't need to solve all of these problems like logging and auditing and credential management. I do that once in one place. I can consume it many times from different places. And just to take a look at kind of where customers are and where this fits in with ServiceNow and the kind of journey that we're on. The far left is that standalone kind of starting point. It could be a bottom-up approach from engineers picking up Ansible, installing it, using it to do some repetitive tasks that they want to automate, maybe using it to just do some testing and work out what it can do. And that's great. Ansible is a very simple language, very easy to get up and running with. And they'll very quickly do some powerful automation with Ansible. As we then start to think about how do I then, move away from individual automating to multiple teams, I don't want everyone maintaining their own Ansible environment. I don't want everyone solving that logging, auditing, credential management problem. This is where Ansible Tower comes in, provides us with a platform, helps us with best practices, helps us to provide a platform for multiple teams to automate with. And then finally, as we move into that integrated stage on the far right, the ability to consume this automation now via an API in a standard way means that we can start to think about integrating with our ServiceNow, our monitoring stack, and other things that we're inevitably going to need to integrate with as we keep going on this automation journey. So moving on then, after hopefully that explains the automation platform that we have and some of the components of it. We'll be looking at those in more detail, and then just looking at specifically what we've got for ServiceNow. So we've just announced, or very recently announced, certified supported content for automating against ServiceNow. So again, think of those platforms that we had at the start with AWS and Cisco and other partners. ServiceNow is one of those supported partners now that you can, if you're, if you want to automate against ServiceNow with Ansible when you're a Red Hat customer, if you're having issues with that automation, if you need enhancements, you can pick up the phone, raise support tickets, and we'll work on those for you. So there's really what we're trying to do with this new certified collection is close that loop between automation and the business interfaces, or the kind of ITIL processes. So it's great that we can automate and start to do things kind of more rapidly, but ultimately we're still going to need to follow things like change management processes, change approvals. We can't just start automating without any controls around it. We still need to follow those kind of ITIL practices. And that's what we're trying to do here with this integration. We're trying to bridge that gap, and so that we can start to think about automating some of those processes, but also hooking those processes into our automation platform. And like I said, I'll be covering off some of those use cases today. In terms of the actual components that we have, so from the ServiceNow side, there is an Ansible spoke that lives on the integration hub. So if you're a ServiceNow customer and you have access to the integration hub, you'll find the Ansible spoke there. That is basically used to allow ServiceNow to call and consume Ansible Tower, so the Ansible Automation platform. So allowing ServiceNow to make outbound calls to Ansible to basically execute jobs, basically consume automation jobs. So like I say, that's available on the integration hub. On the Red Hat side of things, we're providing content to allow us to go the other way. So allow us to go from Ansible back into ServiceNow to do things like create, update, and close records. So whether that's a change record, a problem record, an incident record, or even an object within the CMDB, we're providing that bridge back from Ansible or automation into ServiceNow, so that we can go both ways now. ServiceNow can call automation platform, the automation platform can call ServiceNow. So like I said, we're trying to close that loop and allow us to automate across these different components. So we're going to look at an initial use case. So like I say, not too many slides, hopefully more examples than me just talking and going through slides. So the first use case I want to go through is basically Ansible calling ServiceNow to do things like open, close, and update requests, and whether they're change requests, incidents, objects in the CMDB. There's a few things we can do. I'll show you how you can find out what you can do, and then we'll run through some examples. So if we look at an example here of incident management with Ansible, this is the Ansible language if you've never seen it before. It's a human readable automation language. It's YAML indentation, so we need to get the indentation right. But it's a human readable language in terms of, there's no programming here. And we can see here, I'm calling on the important lines here really are this servicenow.itsm.incident line here. This is one of those capabilities we're providing as part of this certified ServiceNow collection to allow us to interact with incidents within ServiceNow. And what we're doing here is no programming, just key value pairs that this what we call a module in Ansible accepts. So the caller, the requesting user, the state that this incident should be in, description, impact, urgency. Very simple key value pairs that will be very obvious to those that use ServiceNow to interact with the incidents and in this instance raise a new incident. So like I say, very simple human readable language. Let's go ahead and take a look at an example and see how we can kind of work out what's available to us. So if we go to, if you're a Red Hat Ansible customer, you can go to cloud.redhat.com and you can go and look at the automation platform tile in there. I mentioned that we have something called the Automation Hub, which has got a list of all of the certified supported partners that we're working with. So you can see here things like Arista, A10, Microsoft Azure, Cisco, a good number of partners that we're working with here. If I search for ServiceNow, this is the new supported ServiceNow capability that we have. And in terms of how do we work out what it can do, how do I use it? Very simply, this is the starting point. Go to the docs. And we'll see here, this is a collection for interacting with the ServiceNow ITSM, the versions of Ansible that it requires. And then I can dig into the contents of this to work out, okay, what is it I can actually do with this, this content collection, and then how do I use it? So we can see here, we've really got two kind of elements to this. We've got information gathering capability, so I can go and query and find out information about things. And then we also have the capability to update, create, manage objects within ServiceNow. So if I go ahead and look at this incident module here, you can see here this is to manage incidents in ServiceNow and the ability to create, update, and delete these incidents. And what this is telling me is all of those key value pairs that I can provide that we saw in that previous example. So the person who's reporting the incident, if I was to close it, some of the closure codes I could provide, things like descriptions and a whole bunch of other options I can pass in here. And the really nice thing with all of these documentation examples is right at the bottom here, here's an example of how to create an incident, which I can literally copy and paste and use that as a starting point to begin automating with. So this would create a very basic incident within ServiceNow with a basic description and some urgency and impact. But it gives you a really easy way of getting up and running with this automation language. So let's go ahead and look at an example here that I'm going to bring up on my screen. I'll try and run examples from both the command line and from Ansible Tower so you can see both. I'll make that screen slightly bigger, not too big. Hopefully that's okay. All right, so I'm going to run an example incident playbook here. This is going to go through creating an incident, gathering information from the incident, updating it and closing it. And this is a nice way to get some time off work actually and make it look like you're busy. So the first thing I'm going to do is create the incident in ServiceNow. And we can see here it says it's creating the incident to make it look like I'm working. And then the second thing I've done is after creating the incident, because I didn't know the number of it when I created it, I've kind of captured the incident number, and then I'm using the query ability to go ahead and find information about the incident. So we can see here, if I scroll through it, there's my incident number. It's currently in a new state, so I haven't started doing anything with it yet. But if I go ahead and grab that incident number and jump into ServiceNow and search for it, we'll hopefully see this new incident has been raised. So there it is. A really simple example. I've created a really important incident with something really important is broken. I've set the priority to critical, and I've put an update in there to say this could take all day to fix. So at this point, I can go and have a cup of tea, sit in the garden, have a sleep, watch the football. And then when I've decided I'm ready to post an update and make it look like I'm working again, I can just hit enter, and I've got a task here that's going to update it to make it look like I'm working. And again, we're pausing here. So if we go back into the incident now, there's a new update. So we've changed the incident state from new to in progress. And we've added an update saying working hard, lots of troubleshooting. So again, if I scroll up, the incident's now in this in progress state, and we have now updated an existing incident. And then at the end of the day, after I've had a sleep, maybe gone to the pub, and I decided I've had enough for the day, I can close the incident as the hero. So if I go back into ServiceNow again now and look at this and scroll back to the top, the incident now is now closed. If I scroll down and look at the closure code, we can see I've set it to close permanently. The resolution is only I know how to fix it, you won't understand. And I've added a note saying I might need tomorrow off to recover from this heavy work. So there's a simple example from the command line of how we can interact with ServiceNow. If I go and look at the actual playbook that I ran, you can see, hopefully, it's basically the example we saw from the docs page. So using the ServiceNow.itsm.incident module to create an incident of state new, create a description, add comments to it. That's all I'm doing here. I'm just using these modules with key value pairs. Here I'm gathering the incident information number using the request record that I got from the first, when I created it. And here's an update that I'm adding to the ticket. So just a few lines to do the update to say I've moved it to in progress and I've added a comment. So you can see here, very simple language here to update these records, create them, and use them. So let's take a look at a kind of more sensible example, and we'll look at this through Ansible Tower. So Ansible Tower, like I say, is our platform for executing this automation. It provides us with a user interface to perform this automation, and like I say, gives us an API, which is going to be important as we move on to some of the other examples we want to look at. Now, one of the things I mentioned Ansible Tower provides is credential management capability. I think this is slightly larger so everyone can see it. So you can see here, I mentioned that I might want to automate against lots of different platforms. So here I've got NetApp, Azure, F5 load balancers, GitLab credentials, EC2 credentials from my AWS account, monitoring credentials. And the other thing here I've got is a ServiceNow credential. So I want to be able to store my ServiceNow credentials here in Ansible Tower with fully encrypted passwords so that I can use them. I can maybe allow others to use these credentials so that they can raise incidents and alerts, but without giving them the password, without giving them the keys to the kingdom. And it's very simple to do this. So again, if we go back to the documentation and we take a look at how we use these modules, we can see that it's looking for, you can either pass parameters to it. So I can either pass it a username parameter and a password parameter, or I can set environment variables. So if I set an environment variable called sn_username, it's going to pass that through. And that's exactly what we're doing with Ansible Tower here. We're using Ansible Tower's ability to pass these environment variables through. So in Ansible Tower, all I've done is created a custom credential. So here's my ServiceNow custom credential, which is setting those environment variables. So now as I create a ServiceNow credential type, it's setting those environment variables that the ServiceNow modules are expecting. So it's very simple to set up that credential type. I'll share a blog post with you at the end of this, which explains how you can do this. And then, like I say, now that I've got a new credential type called ServiceNow, I can now populate those fields so that it's going to set my ServiceNow instance, my username, my password as those environment variables when I execute my job. So let's go ahead and look at another example here, and we're going to run a second example here of using Ansible to go and update ServiceNow to create an incident. Here I'm going to do an application deployment to as part of a workflow. So I'm going to use Ansible to deploy my application. It's going to go and connect to a server and try and deploy Apache, and it's going to make an error in the configuration on purpose. So we're going to purposely break the configuration. The service is going to fail to start. I'm then going to go back into that failed web instance. I'm going to gather some logs from it. I'm going to raise an incident. I'm going to add the logs to the incident. So, you know, the first example was silly, but shows you how we can use the modules to create, update, and close incidents. This one, hopefully, maybe a slightly more mature example where we are, you know, trying to do something like deploy an application, make a change, and if we have a failure, because this could be running out of hours, let's raise an incident. Let's try and populate the incident with some helpful information to help us troubleshoot. So let's launch this job. So we're running the first stage here, which is to deploy our application. I can't remember if I reset it or not, so it may have already had the error in the configuration, but we can see here now the web service has failed to start. So our Apache server has failed to start. And if I go back and look at the following task here, what we're saying here is on failure of this first job, execute the second job, which is to raise that incident in ServiceNow. So if the first part of this had worked, this red line here indicates that it should only run on failure. The second part wouldn't have worked, so we wouldn't have raised an incident. But because we have had a failure, we've gone back into the incident. We've gathered some logs. So if I go and click on this gather logs task, we can see I'm just running journal CTL to gather some data. And then I've gone into ServiceNow to create the incident. And we can see here I'm printing the new incident number that I've just created. So let's grab that incident number and go back into ServiceNow. And let me search for that. And we can see here now this incident that I've raised. I've raised it as the Ansible Automation platform as the caller here, so we know that it's come from Ansible. I've set the priority and urgency. I've added a description here, and I've also added a note here to say that this is the job ID from Ansible Tower that this failure has come from. We'll come back to that because we can use that then as a way of instantly going into Ansible Tower and finding the relevant job that's triggered this. And if I scroll down here, there's the log output that we gathered. So when the deployment failed, I ran a command to gather some data. We've used that data then to populate a note within ServiceNow. And we can see here the failure reason here, permission denied binding to port 800. There's a typo here. SC Linux is preventing Apache from starting on port 800 because it's non-standard. So the applications failed to start. But it gives us, a nice way of, without having to log into the instance, some initial troubleshooting guidance. And like I say, it also gives us a starting point to go and investigate this problem because it's telling us what created this incident, which job. So if I grab that incident ID and go back into Ansible Tower, I should be able to see it here. If I go and look at the kind of audit history there, you can see straight away job ID 1182, but I can search for that ID as well. And we can see here the workflow, the job that created that incident. And like I say, I can then, if I was to pick up that incident and start troubleshooting it, I could look in the details. I could see, when did it run, who launched it, came from the admin user, and then I can see some of the details about what ran, what failed. So it gives you a nice, easy way to start looking at some of these incidents and a way of automatically raising them. So let's move on to the next use case. So we've looked at kind of using Ansible to create, update, and close records in ServiceNow. The second use case I want to look at is how we can use the CMDB in ServiceNow as a kind of source of truth for our automation. So for those who don't know, Ansible is an agentless, uses an agentless architecture. So there's no agents deployed with Ansible. We use common connection protocols like SSH for Linux, WinRM for Windows. We make API calls to platforms to automate against them. So there's no agents deployed here, which means we don't know what to automate against. We need to tell Ansible, go and automate against these devices. And that's called an inventory in Ansible. An inventory is a list of hosts that we should go and automate against. So in its simplest form, it's a list of servers, a list of network switches, a list of firewalls, whatever it might be. Now, for large environments, for complex environments, and for environments that are more dynamic, where things are being created and destroyed, manually maintaining that list kind of just doesn't work. So we can use what we call a dynamic inventory in Ansible to go and query a source of truth, pull back information, and use that information as our list of hosts. Use additional data from that source of truth to enrich our automation. So, for example, we can use VMware vCenter as a source of truth. I can tell Ansible, go and query vCenter, pull back a list of VMs. I can tell Ansible to query AWS and pull back a list of VMs. And it will enrich it by telling me which region it's in, what VPC it's part of, what security group it's in, its private IP, and host name, a whole bunch of additional data we get from these sources of truth, which can be useful. In the case of a CMDB, we can obviously use additional data from the CMDB to enrich our automation and help us to understand what we should do. So a CMDB might tell us what service it's part of, who the service owner is. It might tell us maintenance windows. It will tell us whether it's production or development. It will tell us the priority of the server. So there's really useful data in a CMDB that would be hard for me to know up front, that will tell me how I should treat that server potentially and what I should do with it if if I'm automating against it. And so the CMDB integration is very simple. Again, we provide documentation and then a plugin to query the CMDB, and I'll show you that documentation. and we'll look at an example. So what we're doing here, very simply, the top example is the configuration itself. So we're basically saying query the CMDB, group the hosts by the manufacturer and by the operating system, and only include hosts that are either Linux, Red Hat, or Windows XP. And when we run that with the command at the bottom there, we can see it's pulling back a list of hosts and it's grouping them based on manufacturer and operating system. And it's only grabbing the hosts types that we've specified. So very simple to configure, very useful to enrich our automation. So again, let's look at examples from this, both for command line and Ansible Tower. So again, back to the documentation, always the starting point. There is a documentation link for the inventory plugin. So we can see here, this is a source for querying the ServiceNow records. And again, all of the key value pairs and parameters that I can set for this plugin. So any columns that I want to get, it will grab hostname, IP, and FQDM by default, but I may want to grab additional data from the CMDB. Do I want to do any grouping to group by OS type? I don't know, any tags, any services that I might want to group by. Any excludes, includes. So a whole bunch of parameters we can set there. And again, you'll see examples in the documentation at the bottom. So examples of how to configure it and examples of the output that you might get. So there you go. There's an example I can copy and paste and use that as a starting point to start using this plugin. So, and the other thing to note here actually is that the, where are they? Again, the same environment variables that we used earlier. So if I want to set environment variables to go and query the CMDB, it's the same environment variables, which means that credential that I set up for ServiceNow, I can use again for this as well. So let's go to the command line again. I'm going to go and look at our inventory plugin. So this is my configuration. Always starts with the same plugin name because that's not changing. I'm querying a specific table. I only want to get Linux servers from my CMDB. I'm providing additional columns that I want to get. So rather than just IP, hostname, and I can't remember what the other one was, I'm also getting a patch window. I'm getting some system tags. So additional data that I want to pull out of the CMDB. And here's how I want to group them. I want to group by operating system patch windows tags. So this is what my configuration looks like. So before we run this, let's go into ServiceNow and look at what's in my CMDB. If I go and search for Linux and look at the servers that I have in here, I've only got a small number, but we can see here a mix of RHEL servers. Some of these have got tags associated to them. So you can see here, like server1.example.com. If I click on that one and just wait for this to load, we can see this has got a maintenance window, a patch window set against it. I've got memory, CPU information. So there's some data in here that might be useful for me. And then, like I say, I've got tags associated to some of these objects as well. So if I go and look at tags in ServiceNow, I've got this My App tag here, which is associated to 3 servers, server 1, server 2, and server 3. So hopefully with my configuration, I'm going to pull back this tag group based on this tag as well. So let's run the plugin. So we need to use Ansible inventory from the command line, specify the file to use. And if I run --list, it's going to pull back a whole bunch of information, all of the hosts and some grouping and additional data. There we go. That's gone and queried it. It's pulled back that list of hosts. So we can see here the groupings. I've got a grouping based on patch window, which contains server 1. There's another patch window with another server and a final patch window. Remember that My App tag that I had? It's grouped my 3 servers based on that tag. It's grouped based on, it's providing data on the individual servers themselves. So it's pulling information from the CMDB based on the records that I asked it to pull, and it's grouping based on those. So this is very useful. I could set up a job now to run Wednesday at 11 o'clock at night to do a patching run. It would dynamically query the CMDB, find any servers in that patching window, and I could run patches against them. So now I've got a method now that says, look, you tag your host with the relevant patch window, and I'm going to basically pick it up and find it automatically without having to add it manually into a schedule on my side. I can control all of that with the CMDB. And if I just want to query an individual host to look at its attributes, we can do that as well from the command line. So here's an individual host, and we can see here the operating system that's pulled back from the CMDB, its tags, its patch window. So again, useful information here that we can use on an individual server basis to help decide what we should do with it, how we should group them, how they're classified, what function they provide with the business. And if we go ahead and look at that from Ansible Tower, we can hopefully see, again, the same data will appear in Ansible Tower. So I've got a ServiceNow inventory here. If I go and look at the source for this, because it's a dynamic inventory, I'm sourcing data from somewhere else. And actually that file is, I'm just sourcing it from Git, basically. So that example file we just looked at, I'm pulling that in from Git into Ansible Tower and using that as my inventory source. I'm passing it my ServiceNow credentials here on the left, because obviously I need to authenticate and set those variables. And that's it, really. That's all I need to configure. I need to tell it the name of that YAML file that we just looked at. I'm pulling that in from Git, giving it the credentials, and that's all I need to do. And I can now sync the inventory here. So I hit the sync all button. This is now going, Tower's going to go and reach out, go to the CMDB, pull in those hosts, list them all, group them based on the groupings that I specified. So if we go ahead and look at the host button here, there are my hosts all imported. And we can see here the groupings on the right-hand side here. So the Wednesday at 2300 patch window, the fact that it's in the My App group as well, it's pulled that information in for me. And again, I can look at individual servers and look at some of the variables that it's pulled in. So there may be other variables you want to pull in. You may want to group based on different things, but it's configurable. You can basically set this up how you like. And there's a blog post that I wrote that explains how you can configure this, how you can work out what credentials you need, how you can configure the Git repository. Basically, all of the stuff that I've just shown here is documented in this blog post. It's slightly older because it's using the old collection name, but the example follows through the relevant steps that you need to go through. So like I say, there's a blog post there included at the end, which tells you how to get up and running with this. Okay, and then on to the final example that I want to run through. So we've done Ansible calling ServiceNow. I want to go the other way now and actually close the loop on this. So I want to go from ServiceNow to Ansible to make a request to Ansible. And then I want to come back in and close the loop from Ansible back to ServiceNow. So we're going both ways here, pulling together some of the different components we've already done here in use case 1 and 2 to come up with a more integrated story here. So what I'm going to do in this example here is, as a user, and step 1 on the left here, I'm going to go into the ServiceNow service catalog to request an item. That's going to then go through change approval. I'm obviously going to approve it, otherwise it's going to be a really quick demo if I reject it. So I'm going to approve the change request. That's going to then make an API call to Ansible Tower to trigger an automation job. In my instance today, it's going to create a virtual machine in Azure based on some data that I'm going to feed it. So step 3, and we're going to create that virtual machine in Azure. Once the machine's created, I'm going to go and gather some data from it. So I'm going to log into it, find out how many CPUs it's got, memory, IP address, host name, some data from it basically. I'm going to use that to add the VM into the CMDB in step 4. And then step 5, I'm going to go back into ServiceNow and close the change and update it. So what we're showing here is two-way communication between ServiceNow and Ansible, and basically zero-touch implementation from a kind of engineering perspective. I've got a standard change request that I'm happy for others to consume. I still want those ITIL processes and practices. I still need change management. I still need change approval. So let's do that in ServiceNow. Off the back of that approval, though, ServiceNow is going to reach into Ansible to fulfill that request, provide me with the service I requested. I'm then going to go back in and update ServiceNow to say that I've done it or I've failed and close off that change request. So this is completely closing the loop here on this integration. Okay, so for this example, let me go into the service portal in ServiceNow. So this is our service catalog, and I'm going to search for RHEL to look at my catalog offerings around RHEL. And we can see here I've got an Azure RHEL VM offering. And it's prompting me for some basic information. Now, you could have 100 prompts in here. You could have 1 or 2. You could have something more dynamic that when you select RHEL 8, it then comes up and asks you additional questions. This is a very simple example I'm doing here. So I'm prompting for a VM name. I'm prompting for an operating system, a VMware, a size of the VM, and the region to deploy it in within the Azure cloud. And I'm going to go ahead and order this item here and check out and have fingers crossed. So I've ordered this item now. What I want to do now is just go into Ansible Tower and make sure nothing's happening yet, because we haven't approved it yet. Nothing should be happening yet. There shouldn't be any jobs running. We can see here there's nothing running. We would see a job kind of pulsing here and running. So nothing's happened yet. We've not started this automation request. And again, before we approve, let's just double check in Azure. If I go and look in here at my virtual machines, I should see that I don't have any virtual machines at the moment. And again, if we just remind ourselves what's in our CMDB in ServiceNow and look at our Linux servers, I've only got these servers at the moment. So I've just requested a VM called TechTalk. That doesn't exist in the CMDB yet. So back into ServiceNow's service catalog. Look, I'm going to do everything here as a single user. So I'm going to request and approve as the system administrator. I think everyone gets that that wouldn't normally happen. You would normally log in as one user to request, someone else would approve, but I don't think I need to show the login and log out and going in as a different user. So what we're showing here is requesting an item and then approving it. So we can see the parameters that I passed in here. So we should get a RHEL 8 VM called TechTalk of this size in the UK South region. So I'm going to hit approve on that now. So that approval has gone through. And if I go back into Ansible Tower, what we should hopefully see is that API call has been made. We're now running this Azure RHEL VM job. And I can go ahead and click on that, and we can see that the job is running. We're creating some of the objects in Azure. And if I scroll down here on the left-hand side, those parameters that I prompted for within ServiceNow have all been passed through to Ansible, so Ansible knows how to fulfill the request. So the operating system, RHEL 8, we've passed that through. The VM size, the VM name, and the region or location that it should exist in have all been passed from ServiceNow into Ansible Tower to fulfill the request. And then the other thing I'm adding is the actual request number, because when I want to close the loop here and go and update and close the change request, I obviously need to know what that request number was. So we're passing through the request number so that I can go back in and close it off at the end of it. So that's running now. If I go back into Azure and look at my resource group, here's my Ansible Azure resource group. Those objects are now being created. So I've got some TechTalk prefixed objects like the NIC and the public address. The VM should appear in a few minutes. While that's running, let's just jump back into ServiceNow really quickly, and I'll show you how I've done this. So I don't have access to that integration hub that I mentioned earlier. I'm making an outbound REST message. So I'm calling the Ansible Tower API directly from ServiceNow. So we can see here, Ansible Tower, every time I create a new object, provides an API for me to interact with it automatically. I don't need to do anything on that front. So to launch a job, I just need the job ID, the URL for Ansible Tower. And that's all I need to do to launch that job, basically. And then from a workflow perspective, if I go and look at the workflow that we're launching, mine's very simple. I've got an approval, and then I'm either running it or not. But I will just quickly show that while the job runs. So here's my workflow. The workflow begins. It's either approved or rejected. If it's approved, I'm running a script to basically call that API and pass the relevant information in. So this is all, again, documented in a blog post I will share with you at the end. If you have access to the integration hub and you have access to the Ansible Spoke, this is going to be a lot easier. You don't need to do some of these steps that I'm doing. But you can see here, I had a REST API, outbound REST message called Azure VM. That's what I'm calling here. And then I'm passing through those attributes we prompted for. So the request item, the location, the OS name, those fields I'm passing through. And like I say, I've got this documented somewhere in a blog post that I'll share. Okay, let's go back into Ansible Tower and see what's happening. We can see the job has finished. So let's just scroll back up and see what happened. So we created our virtual machine in Azure. Let's just double check we've actually got that VM in Azure. So let me just go back to Azure and quickly refresh. There it is. There's our virtual machine that's up and running now. If I go back into Ansible Tower and just follow through the logs, like I said, once the VM was up and running, we wanted to connect into it, gather some facts from it. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm gathering data from that virtual machine that I've just spun up to find out CPU, memory, some other data that I might want to use to populate the CMDB. I've then gone and updated the CMDB to add that object into it, and then finally gone back into ServiceNow to update the request, close it off, and close that loop off. So let's double check we've done what we said we would do in ServiceNow. So firstly, let's check the CMDB. We should have a VM called Tech Talk. There it is there at the bottom. So we've discovered some information about it. So we now know that even though I just asked for rel 8, it's found out that it's rel 8.1. It's got this amount of memory as reported from within the OS. It's got this CPU count. I've got the IP address. I've made a mess of that, so it's coming up as localhost. But you can see some of the data that we can gather and populate. So we can actually gather data live from the instance, throw that into the CMDB. And if I just grab the change request number from here, actually, so this request number here, and search for that in ServiceNow, we should hopefully find that we've updated this and closed it down. So we can see here that the status is closed complete. And if I scroll down, we should have an update saying it's been provisioned. So there we go. There's an update saying Ansible Automation provision of VM with this IP address, just as an example to show that we've updated the ticket and closed it. So let me just go back into here and then I'll pause for any questions. So hopefully that example made sense. We're using all of the things that we've learned today about Ansible and ServiceNow to provide that two-way communication. So ServiceNow calling Ansible to fulfill service requests, and then ServiceNow then Ansible back into ServiceNow to keep ServiceNow up to date, whether that's CMDB, change records, problem records, incidents. We can go both ways and fully close the loop here. And then finally, some of those blog posts that I mentioned. So the first post there is how to configure the CMDB integration with Ansible Tower. So we can get Ansible Tower pulling the CMDB data out and using that. The second post there is on how you can configure ServiceNow to call the Ansible Tower API using that outbound REST call that we've just seen. And then the final post just talks about the new certified ServiceNow collection, and again goes through some examples of how you can use that. So that is all I had to cover today. I'm going to stop presenting and then pause for any questions, and hopefully that was useful.
Hi Patrick, it's Brian at Sky here. That was a great demo, thanks very much. We're big users of both ServiceNow and Ansible. I've got a couple of questions if it's okay with you.
Yeah,
see
please,
the stuff that you were showing off from Tower towards ServiceNow, does that work without the Ansible spoke being installed in ServiceNow? Because we don't support, as Unix admins, we don't support the ServiceNow side. I just wondered if it all works without the spoke being installed.
Yeah, it does, Brian. Sorry, yeah, it does. So I'm not using the spoke either, actually, in this instance. I don't have access to it because I've only got a developer instance. So I'm just making this out. I'm making use of ServiceNow's. I don't know if you can see my screen there, the outbound REST message there, and so you can just tell it, use this endpoint to request it, and then using the scripting capability in the workflow editor to call that outbound REST message basically and pass in the relevant environment variables.
I do have, sorry, I'm stealing your time, but I do have another question. Is that all your calls from Tower towards ServiceNow, we don't have access to the API today on our own accounts, and we use ADFS to authenticate. Would it need some kind of service account in ServiceNow that had direct API access? Is Sky have built like a custom API that we have to query. So we don't get access to query the ServiceNow APIs directly. I noticed when you were configuring them, you just give it the ServiceNow URL, and I've made a bit of an assumption there that it's calling the ServiceNow APIs under the hood.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Cool.
I think you will need some direct connection to it.
Perfect.
Unless, yeah, so yeah, I think you'll need direct connection, unfortunately, yeah.
No, it's not. It just gives me the power
Yeah.
to go and talk to somebody about it if I know what we're talking about. No, that was
Yeah.
awesome, and thank you very much for sharing.
No problem. No problem. Thank you. Thanks for the questions. I don't know if there's any other questions or anything in the chat. Let me check the chat. Oh, nothing there. So the first thing I would do is implement that take the day off playbook while the football's on, and get something to make it look like you're busy in ServiceNow when you're just sat on the sofa. But if there's no other questions, I will stop the recording and everyone can have a few minutes back and get a cup of tea. I'll just give it a few more seconds and see if anyone's got any questions. Otherwise, I will close it down.
That's great. Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks everyone.